When we think about the Beatitudes, and when I keep studying the Beatitudes, I think we can divide the Beatitudes up into three parts, three groupings. The first one we might want to call our condition. Those who are really the blessed of God, who are in opposition to anything that makes sense to us. Our condition of the followers of Jesus are that they're the ones that are impoverished and have impoverished spirits. They're the ones that grieve, openly grieve and mourn. And they're the ones that are humble and meek. The followers of God this is their characteristic. This is who they are. And yet they do one more thing, and then they respond to that. If they are this, you already have. If they're this way, you already have this. You already have what God wants to give you, and He's already given themselves and gives you comfort as God's children and His citizens of the kingdom. You who are mourning and impoverished, you who are humble, you are already ambassadors, and you already inherit the earth. This is what is already yours. But that's your condition. Because of that condition, as we've said over and over, and people don't change until they feel there's a need for change. If you're not hurting, you don't do anything about anything. You won't deal with a change. Good example of this. Until the doctor comes to you and says, you continue to eat what you're eating, you're going to die. And then you start feeling pain every time you're eating that food he says for you not to eat. Will you then maybe consider the aspect of changing the diet? Isn't that true? I mean, that's my truth. I may have told you about the man who had called me for prayer, and he says, I got to have you over here, Bob. Please come and pray for me. I'm in agony. My stomach is killing me. I went over and prayed with him. And we prayed and we talked, and then I left. A week later, he calls me again and says, I'm in such pain. Come and talk to me. Come and pray with me. I need your prayers. I just can't handle this pain. It's so terrible. I went, okay. I went over and talked to him. The third time he called, I was getting a little frustrated, so I began to ask him some more questions about, okay, when does this pain come? He says, well, it's right after I eat. I said, what are you eating? He says, well, I'm eating fried chicken. I'm eating gravy. I literally love to eat. I said, have you been to the doctor? Yeah. What's the doctor say? I'm supposed to be off fried foods. And I turned to him and I said, so what you're saying is that you need to change, but you choose not to. Yeah. And you want me to pray for you to take the pain away. I said, I'm going to pray for you, but I'm not going to pray for you here. You need to start listening to God, who is telling you through the doctor to change your diet. So you see, we have this condition we're in. We're humbled. We know that we don't know. We know that we're impoverished. We feel totally impoverished spiritually. We just feel so weak spiritually. We even grieve and we can't get out of our grief. And we know that that's the case. So what do? Well, in order to receive it, you have to be able to accept that which is in you and you're experiencing, and have to know that you already have a relationship with God because you've asked Him, you've sought Him. But now, what do? How do you change? You hunger and thirst for His righteousness. That's the second part. That's our response. Our response to this great gift of God is not to say, oh, thank you very much. Now my life is going to be perfect. So every time it's not perfect or it's not going the way I want, I'm going to blame you, God, because I joined your club and this is the way it's going to be. No, sorry, that's not Christianity, and that's not salvation. Salvation is the turning over of our lives to God, realizing that we don't know. So we come and we say, we surrender to you. Not look at me and say, oh, aren't you so glad I signed up with you? You are so privileged to have me as a part of the kingdom. Aren't you? Aren't you? Doesn't work that way, does it? No. What causes all of that pain and all of that frustration and that humility that's building in us, that is causing us to do something else, and that is to try to change our lives and try to do it in the right way. And which is the right way? The way your friends are doing it? The way they tell you on TikTok and the social media how to change your life and get out of feeling so humble and feeling miserable and getting over your grief and feeling impoverished? Is that the way it's going to be done? No. It's going to be turning to Jesus. And so, we heard about last week. It's called hungering and thirsting. It's saying yes to Jesus and hungering and thirsting, not for the world's righteousness, what is right and wrong, but for Jesus' righteousness. And by doing that, they grow satisfaction. They grow in satisfaction and are filled with the presence of God that's within them. Now, the consequences of one who is hungering and thirsting, Jesus doesn't list all of them, but he lists the next few, the next four. He lists them, and it's only representative of what you really receive when you hunger and thirst for righteousness, because he says you'll be filled. And when you're going to be filled with what? You're going to be filled with his Spirit. Not only filled with his Spirit, but you're also going to be filled because of the Spirit of his character of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness. All of that is a product of one who surrenders, one who is hungering and thirst to do what God calls him to do. And so that's good. But Jesus mentions this next one, this one consequence to our response. Through hungering and thirsting, they will be transformed into God's character. And so today we're going to examine what one aspect of that is. In Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, because you'll be blessed and are merciful, and will be shown that same mercy. Dr. Barclay Newman has written this about mercy. He said, mercy is defined as having a feeling or sorrow over someone's bad situation and trying to do something about it. People who are merciful can be said to be kind or forgiving, or to be people who take pity on others, people who show mercy to others. In other words, when you are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, your eyes are open to the misery of others in a much more sensitive way than you've ever done in your life. You begin to feel their hurt, their frustration. And one of the things about Vicki, she is so empathetic that she doesn't go to too many funerals. She can walk by a funeral. This has happened. Didn't know the person, just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and she walked into the church at the Northex, who was going through a funeral, and she saw that it was a funeral, and she started to cry. I don't know if that happens to you, but my wife has such great empathy. It's so wonderful to see, and it's so frustrating to her, but it is part of her character. But that is the part of mercy. It is what we give to others. We see people in ways that we hadn't seen them before. Who's giving you that information? It's not you. You, as being self-centered, usually try to block all that pain out, but now you're starting to see things differently, and you're starting to see mercy. You're starting to see the situation, and you begin to feel a sense of mercy for them. You want to do something for them. The consequences of demonstrating mercy and compassion to others is God's mercy given back to us. We're beginning, the more that you give, the more you receive his mercy. Mercy, love, grace, and compassion are in the center of Jesus' character, and it's the center of his ministry. Jesus said in Matthew 9:13, he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, they're already there, but the sinners, the ones who are seeking after help, that need the help. He has mercy on them. He's coming to them. He's come to us. And if you don't know him yet, he's coming to you, even today. In Matthew 23:23, Jesus says this to the Pharisees. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You should have done it all, but the most important was to show mercy, to give faithfulness and act in justice to your neighbor. There's that story of the unforgiving, they call it the unforgiving servant. The king wants to get all the debts settled, and he starts calling the servants in who owe him money, and this one servant comes in, the king says, well, you owe us what would be comparable to today, an insurmountable amount of money that could not be paid, $1 million, let's say, on what you make, $1 million. And the servant says, I can't pay it. There's no way I can do that. And the king says, well, I'm going to have to do what I can do, and I do, and that's what everybody knows. This is what happens when you can't pay up. I'm going to put you in prison until you can raise the money. And the servant goes, please don't do that. I will find a way to pay it. I'll do anything, but please don't put me in prison. Don't take and put my wife in prison and my children and sell us. Don't do any of that. Please don't. I'll make it up to you. And the king has pity on him, gives him mercy, and says, okay, I'll cancel the debt. And he felt so good about that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He felt so good about that he walked out of the king's presence, and he saw a friend of his that borrowed just a few dollars the other day, and he comes up to him and says, pay up. Well, I can't pay right now. Pay up. And begins to choke him. And then he goes and orders him to be beaten until he pays up the money. And he does this to others. Word gets to the king. What happened with the king? The king heard about it, and he says, bring him to me. And then the king says, because I wrote off your debt. I showed you mercy. In Matthew 18:33, shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servants just as I had on you? You see, that which we receive from God is what we give back to the world. And that's this idea of mercy, being sensitive to others and helping them as much as they can as God has had mercy on you. As Jesus was hung on the cross, his heart was full of mercy. He says in Luke 23:34, Jesus said, Father, as he's hanging there, one of the last words he says to his Father, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. He intercedes on behalf of us to forgive us. They don't know what they're doing. Dr. Newman writes again, this beatitude, this idea of mercy, this beatitude is in contradiction to the traditional Pharisaic theology, which would have affirmed, happy are those who are righteous, for God will be merciful to them. You see, they thought, as many people think, obviously, if I'm doing a good job, he's going to keep me protected and he's going to show mercy on me when things go bad. The thing that I have a problem with this theology is that if you're doing everything good, you probably don't need any mercy from God because you're already doing the good stuff, right? So they wouldn't know what mercy is. They didn't need mercy because they're already doing the good work. Maybe some of you feel that way. Jesus continually taught by word and example in Luke 6:36, be merciful, just as your heavenly Father is merciful. Showing mercy expresses God's love to others. You hear this? This isn't a personal thing. This isn't about you having anger toward an individual. This isn't about your feelings. This isn't about the way that we feel about someone or the way we don't sit there and see a person across the street who we've really not gotten along with, find out that he's had a stroke and he can't work anymore, and you're kind of in the back of your mind said, he's been such a pain in the neck to me, he deserves what he gets. That's not the way it works, is it? In fact, the opposite is true. We reflect God's mercy. We want to reflect that mercy. It's part of living out Jesus' great commission of loving the Lord with all his heart, soul, and mind and strength, and loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. We want mercy on us because we know that we failed, that we're not good enough. So we want that same mercy on our neighbor, even though that neighbor has not done us much help, or has not been favorable to us, or is holding a grudge. The goal of mercy, and this is really important, the goal of mercy toward others is transformation. The goal of giving mercy is for our transformation. It's not just to get us off the hook. It's not just to get us so that we can go back to the way we always were. To experience God's mercy, to experience mercy from someone else, is to give us time to get back into flow so that we can correct what we've done or experience that mercy so that we can then give that mercy to others. It changes us when we receive mercy from others. If you have a lot of pride in your life, you're not very humble. If you can't receive what somebody gives you out of their heart and be angry about it, that's your pride. That's not God. For us to be receptors of God's grace is just as important as being givers of God's grace. In fact, I would say that you cannot truly be givers of God's grace unless you've experienced and accepted his grace. That's the way it works. God's mercy is what flows through us, not ours. Your mercy is based many times on your feelings. God's mercy is based solely on the transformation of the individual that needs mercy. And so our job is not to act out of our feeling about how I feel about doing something really good for someone. It makes me feel so good. I really have a problem with encouraging people in a church to do a particular task. And when I say to them, and you've heard this too, if you give, if you do this, God is going to bless you and you're going to feel so good. And you're going to have people give up and give testimony about, well, you know, I really didn't want to do it, but boy, when I gave that or I did that activity, I felt so good. If that's your motivation for doing something, then that's your own reward. That's what God says. It's your own reward. You'll feel good for a time, but it will not have changed you. It's for you that you did it, not for God. So God's mercy is what flows through us, not our mercy, God's mercy. We in our own logic don't know how to express perfect mercy. It's easy for us just to simply do a blanket thing. So-and-so ran a red light and he hit my car and now I'm supposed to give mercy to him and forgive him. Well, you maybe forgive him, but showing him mercy, that's a question that you need to ask. God's mercy flows through us. It's what he wants us to do for that individual, not what we think ought to be done. We must always listen to God's Spirit and let his mercy flow through us, regardless of how we might feel, just like forgiveness. Forgiveness and mercy and grace are all acts of the will guided by the Lord's leading, not by our feelings. Feelings are there, and they may help, but we're not motivated by our feelings, but we're motivated by God's Spirit. Just like love, having both easy love and tough love, so there is easy mercy and tough mercy, easy forgiveness and tough forgiveness. Sometimes the mercy that you share to someone that you know deep down inside is a mercy that is not going to be appreciated by the person to you. When I was working for Kmart, our stock manager I fired him, and he was not happy with me. And then he got rehired by the manager, and I was not happy with the manager. And a little bit later, he had gotten in trouble, and we went to a party, and he got into a fight with the police. It was too loud, and he was not going to let the police tell him what to do, and so he had a fight with the police, and they arrested him. And the next thing I know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from the police saying he needs to be bailed out, and he gave us your name. Would you come down and pick him up? And so I went down, and I bailed him out, and which seemed all right, because he had a court date. Everything was set. He shows up to the court date. Fine. Then I discovered he jumped bail and ran away to California. And now I was a day before the money was due, and I didn't have it. It was a $500 bail, and I had only $200 in the bank, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was young in my faith, and I said, I don't know what's going to happen here, Lord. I don't know what I'm going to do. I haven't got the money. I got a telephone call. And I said, hi. And he says, is this Bob Cameron? Yes. He says, are you the one that knows so-and-so? Yes. Are you the one that bailed him out? Yes. He's back in town. Really? Yep. And I'm going to tell you where he is. Why are you telling me where he is? Well, he's been messing around with my girlfriend, and I'm going to get back at him because I know he's... And so I said, well, thank you very much. He told me where he was. I immediately called the police. I said, he's out on bail. He's jumped bail. I've got it due tomorrow. You got to catch him. He said, thank you for the information. And I went back to bed. The next day I found out that they caught him. They arrested him. And he was in deep trouble. I turned him in. About 6 months, just under a year later, I'm walking through a casino. Yes, they have casinos in Reno, and yes, I went through a casino to get something to eat. And yes, that's the way it works. So I was walking through the casino, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder. And I turned around, and this guy was huge. I looked right straight at his chest, and I went straight up. He says, you're Bob Cameron, aren't you? I said, yeah. He says, do you remember me? Yeah. You turned me in. Yeah. And I was getting ready to get flattened. And then he stopped, and he moved, and I flinched. He started to bring out his hand, and I just flinched a little bit, and he said, Bob, thank you. Thank you. I needed to do that. That changed my life. I went, oh, I'm very happy for you. Sometimes showing mercy is not happy. Sometimes saying to an individual that you've bailed out a couple of times with some loans and things like that, it's time to say no. The mercy I'm going to show you is by you having to pay the price for what you have taken for granted. It's that individual that continually does what he does, which is hurting people, and you call him on it and you say, you can't do that. He says, oh, but I'll change. And they keep on doing it. Have you met those? And then if you don't forgive them, have you heard this happen? They get upset with you if you don't show them mercy. They get upset with you. What kind of Christian are you? Have you met those individuals that just assume that if that God will forgive them? After all, I'm going to do what God doesn't want me to do, but this makes me happy, so I'm going to do it. And I get into trouble for it, but you're going to bail me out. You're going to lend me the money. You're going to do this for me. You're going to do this for me time after time after time. And then someday, all of a sudden, the money dries up because people aren't going to show that mercy. Now they have to start growing up. And maybe that's where you are sometimes. Maybe some of your children are that way, where you have helped them and helped them and helped them, and you begin showing them mercy after mercy. You've been showing you love to them. You've been showing them grace to them. You've been doing all of this to them, trying to help them get out of the situations that they continually get themselves in, until finally one day you finally have to look them in the face, and as painful as it is, you have to say, no more. But you don't understand. Yes, I do. You're going to have to come to grips with God. What do you mean, God? You'll hear that. You will hear that. I have heard that. And you have to turn around and you have to just simply say, this is what God is saying. I am really giving you mercy. You need this more importantly than you need that debt paid. That's the important part of it, because mercy is a part of God's transformation for others, and because we do it for them and other people do it for us, it is part of our transformation. We as followers of and disciples of Jesus are unworthy recipients of God's love, mercy, and grace. So dare we do anything else but show mercy, love, and grace to others. That's our challenge for the day. That's the reason why you can rejoice and be glad. That's the reason why happy are you when you give mercy, because you'll receive that mercy as well.